What would you do if the person you love most in the world was the one who pushed you off the edge? Judith Peterson, a 8-year-old widowed mother, had spent her entire life building a future for her son, Stephen. She gave him everything, including her house, her only real asset. But what she received in return wasn't gratitude. It was a cold, simple demand: you need to leave. Kicked out by her own son, her old car became her only shelter. As night fell in the cramped, cold space of a parking lot, she was left to face a single question. When everything you've ever believed in is broken, where do you find the strength to start over from nothing? The silence of the ignition. My name is Judith Peterson. I'm a 58-year-old black woman, and for the past 2 months, my life has been quietly fraying at the edges. It all started when my son, Stephen, asked me to add his name to the deed of my house, just to make things easier down the road. "Mama," he'd said, his eyes earnest, "for inheritance, so you don't have to worry. I am a mother." I heard the word worry, and I signed the papers. I didn't know that in the language of the law, I had just handed him a key, not to inherit, but to erase, which brings me to today, to this moment, to me, sitting in my old Chevy across the street from the only home I've ever known, listening to the rain. 10 minutes ago, I became homeless. My son, the boy I built that house for. I just watched his wife tell me to get out. That's the answer to the question you're probably asking. How does a woman like me end up living in her car? It happens on a Tuesday. A cold, gray Tuesday in November, when the sky is the color of a dirty dish rag. It was just after lunch. Amanda, Stephen's wife, called it a family meeting. She stood in the center of my living room, her pregnant belly, a perfect round shield in front of her. Stephen stood by the fireplace, tracing patterns on the mantel with his finger. He wouldn't look at me. Her voice was the only sound in the room. Cool, clean, and sharp. "Judy," she began, "we need you to be practical. This is about the equity." Equity, a word for the 30 years of my life I'd poured into those walls. She spoke of a legal term, a partition sale, a way for a co-owner to force the sale of a property. The words were alien, but the meaning was brutally simple. They were selling my house, my home. I didn't look at her. I looked at Stephen, my boy. I waited for him to say something, to say, "Amanda, stop. This is my mother. This is her home." But all that came from him was silence, a deep, heavy silence that filled up all the spaces between Amanda's words. His silence was his answer. It was his agreement. That silence is what pushed me out the door. I remember that day now, sitting here in the driver's seat, the wipers thumping a slow, mournful rhythm. That was the day I learned that the cruelest words are not always the ones that are spoken. I think back to when Stephen was just a little boy, no older than 7. He'd come home from school with his lip trembling because some kids had been mean. I held his face in my hands, right there in the kitchen that is no longer mine. And I told him, "Remember, Stephen, kindness is a boomerang. You throw it out, and it always finds its way back to you. Always." I whisper the words now, into the cold air of the car. They feel foolish on my tongue. A child's lesson in a world that has grown cruel. I wonder where that boomerang is now. Perhaps it got lost on the way back. I didn't fight them on that Tuesday. My pride was the only thing I owned outright. I walked into my bedroom with its faded rose wallpaper and packed a single bag, a photograph of my late husband, James, a change of clothes, my Bible, the essentials for a life that no longer had a place to put anything down. When I walked out, Stephen was still standing by the fireplace, a statue carved from shame. He wouldn't look at me, and so here I am. The key to the car is in my right hand, its sharp edges digging into my palm. It's the only key that means anything now. The house key in my pocket is just a piece of metal, a souvenir from a life I used to live. I should start the car. I should drive away, but my hands won't move. They feel heavy, anchored to the wheel. To turn the key is to accept it, to accept that Tuesday, to accept that the home in my memory and the house across the street are no longer the same place. So I just sit, in the silence of the ignition, a silence that feels just like my son's. a silence that marks the end of everything I knew. And I watched the rain fall on the Tuesday that broke my life in two. The geography of a parking lot. I ended up at a Walmart, the kind that's open 24 hours a day. The light from its massive sign bleeds into the sky, creating a false, hazy dawn that never ends. For 3 nights now, this parking lot has been my entire world. I'm learning its geography, the way a castaway learns the geography of a desert island. My bedroom is the farthest corner of the lot, near a chain-link fence that separates us from a dark patch of woods. It's where the delivery trucks rumble in and out before sunrise. The noise is a comfort, in a strange way. It's the sound of a world that's still moving, even if mine has stopped. I've learned to recline the driver's seat just so, stuffing my coat behind my head for a pillow. Sleep doesn't really come. It's more like a series of short, gray naps, punctuated by the sound of a car door slamming or the sudden flash of headlights across my face. Fear is a physical thing. It's a cold weight in the pit of your stomach that doesn't go away. The bathroom is inside, of course, near the garden center. It's my least favorite part of the map. I go in very early, around 5:30 in the morning, when the only other people are the overnight stalkers and a few weary-looking truck drivers. I carry my toothbrush and a small bar of soap in my purse. I wash my face with cold water, brushing my teeth as fast as I can, never looking at myself in the mirror for too long. Shame is a hot feeling. It prickles at the back of your neck when you're trying to look like you belong somewhere you don't. My living room, on the days it isn't raining, is a stone bench under a lonely oak tree at the edge of the lot. I sit there and watch people come and go, families pushing overflowing carts, teenagers laughing. I watch them, and I feel invisible. As a black woman of a certain age, I've been invisible for years. People look past you, they don't see you. I used to hate it. Now, that invisibility is my camouflage. It's what keeps me safe. No one pays any mind to an old woman sitting on a bench. I remember when Stephen was a boy, I used to tell him, a clean home is a reflection of a peaceful soul. Son, my house was always spotless, the floors shining, the smell of lemon polish in the air. Now, my home is this Chevy, a clutter of empty water bottles on the passenger side floor, my suitcase in the back, a few cracker crumbs on the seat. The reflection of my soul, I suppose, is just as messy. Yesterday, I was thinking about the pot roast I used to make, the one with the carrots and potatoes that Stephen loved so much. I could almost smell it, right here in the car. The rich, savory scent of a Sunday afternoon. The memory was so clear, so real, that the hunger I felt afterward was for more than just food. It was a hunger for a life that was gone, a hunger for the feeling of being a mother in her own kitchen, providing for her child. I've learned the rules here. Don't park in the same spot 2 nights in a row. Don't sit in the car for too long during the day. Always have a book or a newspaper with you, so it looks like you're just waiting for someone. You become an actor, playing the part of a normal person. The performance is exhausting. This morning, something shifted. I was adjusting the rearview mirror, and I made the mistake of really looking. The woman staring back at me was a stranger. Her eyes were puffy and dull. Her hair, usually so carefully pinned, was flat and lifeless. There were lines around her mouth I'd never seen before, etched there by fear and exhaustion. I didn't recognize her. And in that moment, a different kind of fear washed over me. It was the fear of disappearing completely, the fear of becoming that woman in the mirror for good. I knew, right then, sitting in the gray morning light of a Walmart parking lot, that I couldn't just survive. I had to do something. I didn't know what, but I knew I couldn't let that stranger in the mirror be the end of my story. The weight of a paper cup. Pride is a funny thing. It doesn't keep you warm at night. It doesn't quiet the gnawing ache in the pit of your stomach. But sometimes, it's all you have left. And for 3 days, my pride had been my only meal. The gas station crackers were gone. The last of the cash I had in my purse had gone to keeping the gas tank from hitting empty. Hunger is a persistent noise. At first, it's a whisper, then it's a grumble, and then it's a roar that drowns out everything else. I knew about the little church on Elm Street, First Baptist. They served a hot meal every evening at 6. I'd driven past it my whole life, usually on my way home from work, feeling a distant sort of pity for the people I saw waiting outside. Pity. Another luxury I could no longer afford. The first time, I just drove by. Slowly. My hands were slick on the steering wheel. I told myself I was just looking. The second time, I parked across the street. I watched them line up. People who looked tired. People who looked like they'd been carrying something heavy for a long time. I sat there until the doors closed and the street was empty again. I couldn't do it. My feet felt nailed to the floor of the car. The thought of their eyes on me, of the questions in their silence, was worse than the hunger, but the hunger kept roaring. The third time, I parked in the back lot. I turned off the engine and just sat there, my head resting against the cold glass of the window. I looked at the old photo of Stephen I kept tucked in the sun visor, his little 6-year-old grin full of missing teeth. You taught him to be strong. Judy, I whispered to the empty car. Now it's your turn. A voice inside me. A practical, weary voice that sounded a lot like my own mother, finally broke through. Pride don't fill an empty stomach. Judy, getting out of the car was the hardest walk of my life. Every step felt like it was through thick, wet cement. My head was down. I didn't want to see anyone. I just wanted to be invisible. I joined the end of the line, pulling my thin coat tight around me, hoping it would hide me. The line moved slowly. With each shuffle forward, my heart hammered against my ribs. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me. Even though no one was looking, I felt their judgment, their pity. I was one of them now. The shame was a physical thing, a hot flush on my cheeks. When I finally reached the front, I kept my eyes fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor. I could smell the soup, potatoes, maybe some bacon. It smelled like home. The smell made my eyes sting. A pair of sensible shoes came into view. Then a hand. A gentle, brown-skinned hand like my own, holding out a steaming paper cup. I had to look up. Her name was Deborah Miles, though I didn't know it then. She was a black woman, maybe a few years older than me. Her hair was twisted into a neat silver crown. And her eyes were the first thing that truly broke through my wall of shame. They weren't filled with pity. There was no judgment in them. There was just a calm, quiet understanding, a stillness. She smiled. A small, kind curve of her lips. It's a cold day, she said, her voice soft and low. Hope this warms you up. I reached out. My hand was trembling. When my fingers closed around the paper cup, the warmth spread instantly through my cold skin. It was more than just the heat of the soup. It was a human warmth. I couldn't say thank you. The words were stuck in my throat, tangled up with all the pride and the pain. I just nodded, a quick, jerky motion, and turned away. I didn't sit at the tables inside. I took my cup back to the car, to my cold, private world. I sat there in the dark, the engine off, and held it with both hands. It felt heavy, not because of the soup, but because of what it meant. It was the weight of a kindness I hadn't asked for, the weight of admitting I needed help, the weight of letting my pride finally fall away. I took a sip. The soup was thick and hot, and it tasted like grace. And in the silence of my car, I cried, not for the house I'd lost, or the son who had broken my heart. I cried for the simple, unexpected warmth of a paper cup. Holding that paper cup, I learned that sometimes strength isn't about never falling down. It's about knowing how to accept a hand that's offered to you when you have. Every one of our stories has a moment like that. If you've ever been helped by a stranger, please share that story in the comments. Let's remind the world, and each other, of the power of a small, kind act. A stranger's tea. I went back to the church the next Wednesday, and the Wednesday after that, it became a small, fragile anchor in the middle of my week. A single hour where I wasn't just a shadow in a parking lot. I never stayed long. I learned the delicate art of being present without being noticed. And every time, the woman with the kind eyes was there. I learned her name was Deborah Miles. She had a way about her, a quiet grace. She never asked me any question, not a single one. In a world that I felt was screaming my failure at me from every corner, her silence was a gift. There was no prying. No, so, what's your story that I had been dreading? There was just a quiet nod, a warm smile as she handed me my tray, and always an extra roll of bread placed beside the soup. A small, unspoken gesture. We developed a silent language over those weeks. Her small acts of kindness were the questions. Are you holding up? Did you get enough to eat? And my grateful, hesitant smiles were the answers. I'm still here. Thank you. Yes. Thank you. Still, a part of me, the part that was now hard and suspicious, remained wary. Kindness without a reason was a currency I no longer traded in. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the bill to come due. Then, about 3 weeks after my first visit, a fierce, bone-chilling rain started to fall. The kind of rain that feels personal, like it's trying to find every crack and seam in the world to seep into. It wasn't the gentle rain of my first night of homelessness. This was an angry, relentless downpour. I had eaten my lunch at the church, the sound of the storm drumming against the stained glass windows of the hall. I was walking back toward the exit, preparing myself for the damp chill of my Chevy, when Debbie caught up to me at the door. She was holding an umbrella, a cheerful red one that seemed to defy the gray day. "Judy," she said, her voice calm and steady over the roar of the rain. "This is no weather for sitting in a car." My breath caught in my throat. The words hung in the air between us, simple and direct. She knew. Of course, she knew. How could she not? I probably had the look of someone who slept sitting up. I felt a hot flush of shame rise up my neck, so intense it made my ears burn. I clutched my purse tighter, ready to mutter an excuse and flee. She must have seen the panic in my eyes, the way I was already turning to escape, because her expression softened. "My house is 2 blocks away," she said simply, her voice gentle but firm. "Let me make you a proper cup of tea, just to warm up." I stood there, frozen. Every instinct I had honed over the past few weeks screamed at me to say no, to retreat back to the familiar misery of my car. Being alone was safe. Accepting help was a risk. It was an admission of defeat. But then I looked at her face, really looked at it. There was no judgment there, no pity that would make me feel small. Just a simple, honest invitation. And I was so very, very cold. The dampness had settled deep into my bones. "Okay," I whispered. The word felt foreign on my tongue, rusty from disuse. Walking under her red umbrella, I felt strangely protected, like a child again. The short walk was silent, the only sounds being the splash of our feet in the puddles and the drumming of the rain. Her house was a small, neat brick bungalow with a welcoming yellow door and pots of hardy chrysanthemums on the porch. The moment she opened that door, the warmth washed over me. It wasn't just the heat from the furnace. It was the smell. It smelled like cinnamon and old books, of lemon polish and a life well lived. It smelled like everything I had lost. She led me into a cozy living room. There was a soft-looking floral armchair, a television playing a game show quietly in the corner, and a sturdy wooden shelf filled with framed pictures of smiling children and grandchildren. It was all so normal, so wonderfully, achingly normal. I stood there, dripping on her clean, polished wood floor, feeling like a ghost from another world. "You sit right there," she said, pointing to the armchair with a gentle smile. "Don't you worry about the floor. Floors are made to be walked on." I sank into the chair. The cushions seemed to sigh and cradle me. It was the first truly comfortable thing I had sat in for weeks, and my body ached with gratitude. Debbie disappeared into the kitchen, and I could hear the comfortable, domestic sounds of a kettle being filled, of ceramic mugs clinking, of cupboards opening and closing. The rain beat against the window pane, but in here, it was a soothing sound, not a threatening one. I felt a tightness in my chest that I didn't even realize had been there for weeks begin to loosen. Just a little. She came back with 2 steaming mugs on a small tray. She set one on the little table beside me. The steam smelled sweet, like herbal tea. Then, she did something I'll never forget. She went to a nearby closet, pulled out a thick, handmade quilt, a patchwork of blues and greens, and gently draped it over my shoulders. It was heavy. It felt like a hug. She didn't say a word. She just went and sat in her own chair across from me, picked up her mug, and took a sip of tea, as if having a homeless woman crying silently in her living room was the most natural thing in the world. And I did cry. Silent tears, tracking down my face and soaking into the collar of my coat. They weren't tears of sadness. Not exactly. They were tears of relief. The kind of tears that come when a heavy, invisible weight you've been carrying, a weight you didn't even know you could set down, is finally lifted. Just for a moment, in the quiet warmth of that room, with the weight of that quilt on my shoulders. I wasn't a failure living in a car. I was a guest. I was seen, and for the first time in a long time, I felt safe. Part 5. The kitchen table in Debbie Miles's house was made of old, worn oak. It had nicks and scratches, the ghosts of family dinners and homework sessions long past. It felt solid under my elbows. Real. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was sitting on something that wouldn't suddenly give way beneath me. We'd been sitting there for a while, the silence comfortable, the air filled with the scent of cinnamon from her tea. She hadn't asked a single question about my life, not where I came from, not why I was at the church kitchen. Nothing. She just refilled my cup when it was empty and talked about the finches at her bird feeder. But kindness like that has a way of making you feel safe. And in that safety, the story I had locked away inside me started pushing against my ribs, demanding to be let out. So I started talking. The words came out in a rush at first, clumsy and tangled, like a river that had finally broken through a dam. I told her about the house, my house, about raising Stephen in it after my James passed away. I told her about the papers he'd asked me to sign, about my own foolish, trusting heart. I told her about that Tuesday, about Amanda's clean, sharp words, and Stephen's terrible, suffocating silence. I told her about the nights in the Walmart parking lot, the fear that was a cold knot in my stomach. I told her about the shame, a shame so heavy it felt like a second coat I couldn't take off. I told her everything. I laid the whole ugly, painful story out on that solid oak table between us. Throughout it all, Debbie just listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't gasp or say, "Oh, you poor thing." She just sat there, her hands wrapped around her own warm mug, and her eyes never left my face. She listened not just with her ears, but with her whole being. It was the kind of listening that makes you feel seen, truly seen. When I finished, the silence that followed was different. It wasn't empty. It was full of the weight of my truth, finally spoken aloud. I felt lighter, exhausted, but lighter. Like I'd just set down a suitcase I'd been carrying for a lifetime. I took a shaky breath, expecting, I don't know what I was expecting. Advice. Maybe. Pity. But what she said next was not what I expected at all. She looked at me for a long moment. A gentle, thoughtful expression on her face. Then she said, "Judy, I recognized you that first day at the kitchen." I frowned. "You did?" "Yes," she said, her voice soft with memory. "My late husband was Frank Miles. He used to work with your husband, James, at the freight company. Years and years ago, the name hit me like a stone dropping into a deep well. Frank Miles. A kind, quiet man. James had liked him. I'd met him once or twice. A lifetime ago." Debbie continued, her eyes looking somewhere far away. "There was a company picnic one summer, at Freedom Park. You were there with Stephen. He couldn't have been more than 8 or 9. James had passed not too long before that." She paused, and then her eyes met mine again, clear and direct. "I remember watching you that day," she said. "You were all alone, but you weren't. You were chasing Stephen around the playground, laughing when he went down the slide too fast. You managed his scraped knee and his sticky ice cream fingers all by yourself. I remember turning to Frank and saying, 'Now that is a strong woman.' Back at 9, I couldn't speak. My throat felt thick. All this time, I had seen myself as a broken, homeless woman, a failure. But she saw someone else. She saw a memory of a strength I thought I'd lost forever. The irony of it was so sharp, so painful and beautiful all at once. The one person who offered me a hand was someone who remembered me when I was at my strongest." Debbie reached across the table and placed her warm hand over my trembling ones. "This house is too big for one old woman, Judy," she said simply. My children are grown and have homes of their own. The silence in these rooms gets mighty loud sometime. She squeezed my hands gently. Stay, she said. Not a question, but a statement. A quiet, firm invitation. Stay here, as long as you need. Stay and build things back up. The woman I saw at that picnic, she's still in there. Judy. She just needs a safe place to rest for a while. The offer wasn't from a stranger anymore. It was from someone who had seen a piece of my past, a piece of my soul, that I had forgotten was there. I looked at her, at the kindness in her eyes that asked for nothing in return, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the tears that came were not tears of pain or shame, they were tears of relief, and through them, I nodded. The rhythm of flour and sugar. The days in Debbie's house fell into a gentle, healing rhythm. There was the morning coffee, the quiet afternoons reading borrowed books from her overflowing shelves, the shared dinners where we talked about everything and nothing. It was a peaceful existence, a soft, quiet place to land after a hard and sudden fall. But peace, I was learning, can start to feel like stagnation if you stay in it too long. My body was safe, my belly was full, but my spirit felt idle, like a car parked in a garage. Engine off, keys hanging on a hook by the door. Going nowhere. My hands, once always busy, now felt empty. One afternoon, Debbie came home from her volunteer shift at the church, her face bright with a little mission. She handed me a crumpled flyer she'd pulled from the community bulletin board. It was printed on a cheerful, almost offensively bright yellow paper, advertising free classes at the local community center. My eyes scanned the list: pottery, basic computing, conversational Spanish, and then landed on one line: Introduction to Baking. I looked at the paper, then back at her, a skeptical smile touching my lips. Baking Debbie. Honey, I'm almost 60 years old. My learning days are a ways behind me. I'm a little past the point of learning a new trade. She just smiled, that patient, all-knowing smile of hers. She reached out and took my hands in hers, turning them over, palms up. Her touch was warm and firm. These hands were made for creating good things. Judy, she said, her voice soft but sure. They were made to pat a child's back, to sew a button, to steer a pot. They weren't made just for gripping a steering wheel in the dark. Her words stayed with me long after she'd gone to water her plants. My hands, for weeks, they had been a symbol of my helplessness, clenched in fear in a dark car, trembling with cold in the morning, accepting a paper cup of soup with a shame that burned. The idea of using them to make something again, to create instead of just endure, felt foreign. It felt hopeful, and hope was a feeling I was still getting used to, like a new pair of shoes that needed breaking in. So, the next Tuesday, with a nervous flutter in my stomach, I went. The community center was a cacophony of life, noisy and bright, filled with people of all ages and walks of life. I felt a familiar wave of self-consciousness wash over me as I found the classroom. I was the oldest one there by a good 20 years. A gray-haired island in a sea of young mothers, chatting about their toddlers and college kids scrolling on their phones. I almost turned around right then, my old friend Shame whispering that I didn't belong here. But then the instructor, a cheerful, round-faced woman named Mary, with flour dusting her apron, clapped her hands together and said, "All right, bakers, let's wash up and find a station," and something in her welcoming energy made me stay. The first thing we did was simple. We measured flour. I plunged the metal cup into the soft, cool bin and watched the fine white powder cascade into my bowl. A silent, graceful waterfall. Then came the sugar, glistening like tiny crystals. The fine grains of salt, the cold, firm cubes of butter. Simple ingredients, ordinary things, the building blocks of comfort. Then Mary told us to put our hands in and mix, to break the butter down into the flour until it resembled coarse sand. The moment my fingers sank into the cool, crumbly mixture, something deep inside me unlocked. It was a feeling I hadn't realized I'd missed so profoundly. A muscle memory, buried under layers of grief and fear. I was instantly transported back to my own mother's tiny kitchen in the house I grew up in. I could almost smell the yeast and see her, standing at her wooden counter, her strong, capable hands dusted with flour, humming a gospel hymn as she worked the dough for her Sunday biscuits. I remembered the feel of her hands guiding mine when I was a little girl, teaching me how to fold and press. Firm but gentle. Don't overwork it. Judy girl. She'd say, you gotta respect the dough. In that noisy classroom, surrounded by strangers, I was suddenly powerfully connected to her, connected to a long line of strong women who knew how to make something nourishing and beautiful out of almost nothing. It was a legacy I had forgotten I carried in my own two hands. I worked the dough for our simple sugar cookies, my movements growing more confident, more rhythmic. The frantic, anxious energy that had lived in my chest for months, a hummingbird trapped in my ribs, began to soften. It smoothed out, following the steady rhythm of my hand. Push, fold, turn, push, fold, turn. It was a meditation. It was a prayer. For the first time, my mind wasn't racing, replaying that terrible Tuesday, dissecting every word, every silence. I wasn't thinking about Stephen, or the house, or the car. I was just thinking about the feel of the dough beneath my hands, how it yielded and came together. It was the first time my mind had been truly quiet in a long time. When I pulled my tray of cookies from the oven, they were far from perfect. Some were a little too brown on the edges. Others were charmingly lopsided, but they were golden. And the smell that rose from them, vanilla and butter and warmth, was the smell of 1,000 happy memories. It was the smell of safety. It was the smell of home. A young woman at the station next to me, a girl with bright pink hair and the tired, smudged eyes of a new mother, picked one up after it had cooled enough to touch. She took a bite, and her whole face softened, the tension around her eyes melting away. Wow, she said, her mouth full. She looked over at me, a genuine, surprised smile spreading across her face. Your cookies taste like a hug. A hug. I don't think I could ever explain what those 4 simple words meant to me in that moment. It was more than a compliment on a cookie. It was a validation of my existence. It was a reminder that even after everything I had lost, even feeling as broken as I did, I still had the capacity within me to create something that could bring a moment of comfort and warmth to another human being. That evening, I carried a small bag of the lopsided cookies back to Debbie's house like a precious treasure. I set them on the old oak table between us as we had our tea. She picked one up, examined its imperfect edges with a knowing smile, and took a bite. She closed her eyes for a moment, just savoring it. Well, Judy Peterson, she said, opening her eyes again, a genuine sparkle in them. You've been holding out on me. This is the best cookie I've had in years. Watching her enjoy something I had made with my own 2 hands was a profound turning point. It was a small thing, a simple cookie, but it shifted the foundation of my new life. For the first time since that Tuesday, I wasn't the one receiving help. I was the one giving something back. Even if it was just a little bit of sugar and flour. In that small act of sharing, I wasn't a burden. I wasn't a charity case. I was a baker. I was a friend. I went back to that class every single week. I learned to make scones that were tender and flaky, muffins that were light as air, and a lemon pound cake that was so moist and bright it tasted like sunshine. And with every batch I baked, with every new recipe I mastered, I felt like I was rebuilding myself. 1 cup of flour, 1 teaspoon of vanilla, 1 act of creation at a time. I was finding a new, quiet rhythm for my life. A rhythm of flour and sugar, a rhythm of hope, the dignity of a paycheck. Living with Debbie was a balm for my soul. Her quiet home was a sanctuary where I could breathe again. But a soul needs more than just safety. It needs purpose. And I knew, deep down, that I couldn't truly heal until I could stand on my own 2 feet again. I couldn't live on the charity of a kind heart forever. No matter how generous it was, I needed to work. The thought was terrifying. It had been years since I'd had to look for a job. My world had been my home, my son. Now, at 58, with a gap in my history I couldn't explain. What was I worth in the marketplace? I started with the applications, Online forms that asked for dates and skills I felt I no longer had. I tried a few places. A diner. A cleaning service. I got the same polite, thin smile every time. The silent rejection. We'll keep your application on file. A kinder way of saying no. After the third one, a familiar despair began to creep back in. Cold and damp like the nights in my car. Maybe this was it. Maybe I was just used up. But then I saw the sign in the window of the Harris Teeter grocery store down the road. Help wanted bakery department. Baking. That was something I could do. Something my hands remembered. The manager was a young man named Carlos. Probably younger than my Stephen. He looked tired. And his tie was a little crooked. He glanced at my application, at the empty space for my most recent employment. I saw the question in his eyes. I decided, right then, to tell a piece of the truth. Not the whole story, but a piece. I've been going through a difficult family transition. I said, my voice steadier than I felt, but I know my way around an oven. I know the difference between a good crumb and a dry one. I know that the smell of fresh bread can make a bad day feel a little better. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at my hands, resting on my lap. They're not young hands. They're wrinkled and have a few age spots, but they're clean and they're capable. Maybe he saw that. Can you start Thursday? He asked. Those 4 words felt like a miracle. The first few days were hard. My feet ached from standing for 8 hours. My brain felt slow and clumsy trying to learn the new cash register. With all its buttons and codes, there were impatient customers. A broken frosting machine. A batch of burnt croissants. More than once, I felt that hot flush of shame. The fear that I was too old, too slow. That I'd made a mistake, but I didn't quit. I wrote notes on a little pad I kept in my apron pocket. I watched how the other women handled the bread slicer. I learned the names of the regulars. I learned to smile even when a customer was rude. I learned to say, have a wonderful day, and mean it. Because I knew just how precious a simple, ordinary day could be, and slowly, something began to shift inside me. With every tray of muffins I pulled from the oven, with every loaf of sourdough I bagged, I felt a little piece of myself coming back into focus. I was no longer just a victim of a terrible Tuesday. I was Judy Peterson. I was the lady who could tell you the best way to keep your cornbread moist. I was a person with a purpose again, even if it was just for a few hours a day. Then came Friday, payday. Carlos handed me a small, sealed envelope with my name printed on it. I tucked it into my purse without looking. I walked home, my feet aching, but my steps felt lighter than they had in months. I didn't open it in front of Debbie. This was something I needed to do alone. I went to the small guest room that had become my haven. I sat on the edge of the bed and held the envelope in my hands. It was thin. It didn't weigh much at all. I carefully tore open the seal. Inside was a check. My name was printed neatly on the top line, Judith Peterson. And next to it, a number. It wasn't a large number. It was the wage for a part-time job, after taxes had taken their bite. But as I looked at it, my vision started to blur. I wasn't seeing the number. I was seeing the hours of standing, the sore muscles, the effort of learning something new. I was seeing the burnt croissants and the smiles of the customers who bought my cinnamon rolls. I was seeing the dignity in an honest day's work. This check, this was mine. I had earned it. No one had given it to me out of pity. No one could take it away. It was proof that I was not invisible, proof that I could still contribute, that I could still build something. Even if it was just a small life, one paycheck at a time. I didn't go out and spend it. I just sat there, holding it, for a long, long time. The paper felt solid in my hands. It was the first solid thing I had held that was truly, completely my own since that Tuesday. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I walked back to the Harris Teeter, not as an employee, but as a customer. I used a small portion of my own money to buy groceries, a roasting chicken, some sweet potatoes, green beans, the ingredients for a proper Sunday-style dinner. That night, for the first time, I cooked for Debbie. I filled her warm, kind house with the smells of my own cooking as we sat at that old oak table, sharing a meal that I had bought with my own wages. I wasn't her guest anymore. I wasn't a charity case. We were just two friends. Two equals, sharing a meal. And that felt richer than anything money could buy. That paycheck was more than just money. It was proof that I still had value, that I could still stand on my own 2 feet. This journey has been long, and it has been lonely. If you are still listening, please help me by commenting "I am here with you." Judy below. So, I know that I still have companions walking with me on this path. Your presence is the greatest encouragement as I prepare to tell the final, hardest part of my story facing the past. The sound of his voice. The months began to stack up, one on top of the other, like clean laundry folded and put away. Autumn bled into a mild winter, and winter thawed into a hopeful spring. My life found a new, quiet rhythm. 3 days a week at the supermarket bakery, surrounded by the comforting scent of bread. Tuesdays were for my baking class, where I was now more of a helper than a student. And every evening, a simple meal shared with Debbie. My world was small, but it was solid. It was mine. The shame that had been my constant companion in the parking lot began to recede. It was still there, a faint scar on my soul, but it no longer defined my days. In its place, a fragile sense of peace had started to grow. I had a bank account again. Watching the numbers on the little deposit slip slowly climb was a quiet thrill. Each dollar was a brick. I was building something new, something that couldn't be taken away from me. I was building myself. That particular afternoon, I was sitting at Debbie's kitchen table with the classified section of the local paper spread out before me. I had a red pen in my hand, circling ads for small, one-bedroom apartments. The idea of having my own key again, a key to a door that was truly mine, was a beacon of light I was steadily walking toward. The sun was streaming through the window, warming my back. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. It was a moment of perfect, ordinary peace. And then, the phone rang. It was my phone. An old flip phone Debbie had helped me get a prepaid plan for. I rarely used it. The sound was jarring, an intrusion from a world I had tried so hard to leave behind. I picked it up from the counter, my heart giving a sudden, nervous lurch. The name on the little screen made all the air leave my lungs. Stephen. I stared at it. It felt like a name from a different lifetime. A lifetime that belonged to another woman. I hadn't heard from him. Hadn't seen him. In nearly 8 months, the phone vibrated in my hand. It's a frantic, buzzing thing. My first instinct was to press the red button, to make it stop, to preserve the quiet peace of my afternoon, but I didn't. My thumb hovered over the green button. What did he want? Was he in trouble? Was Amanda having the baby? The old, familiar ache of a mother's worry. An instinct I thought I had buried, stirred deep inside me. With a trembling finger, I answered. I didn't say anything. I just held the phone to my ear, my knuckles white. Mom. The sound of his voice, it was thinner than I remembered. Raspy. It wasn't the confident, dismissive voice from that day in the living room. This was a different voice, a broken one. I still couldn't speak. The silence stretched on, filled only by the ticking of the clock. Mom? Are you there? He asked, a desperate edge to his words. I'm here, I said. My own voice sounded rusty, distant, and then it all came pouring out, not in a rush, but in a series of jagged, painful sobs. He told me everything. It wasn't about the equity. It wasn't about needing space for the baby. It was about debt, a mountain of it. Gambling debt, he whispered. The words choked with shame. He'd lost his savings, then started borrowing from people you shouldn't borrow from. He was in deep, terrifying trouble. Amanda found the letters. He choked out. She gave me a choice. Sell the house, pay it off, and start fresh, or she would leave. She would tell you everything. I didn't know what to do. Mom, I panicked. I listened. My body rigid. I wasn't feeling sympathy. I wasn't feeling anger. I was feeling nothing. A vast, cold emptiness. It was like I was listening to a story about strangers. The house, the threats, it all clicked into place. A terrible, logical puzzle. Amanda hadn't been the architect of my pain. She had just been the foreman. overseeing a demolition my son had already ordered. I thought I could fix it. He continued, his voice barely audible. I thought I could pay it all off. Get us back on our feet. And then I'd find you. I'd make it right. I swear. Mom. That's what I thought. I remained silent. My silence wasn't the weak, wounded silence from that day. This was a different silence. It was heavy, solid. It was a wall I was building, brick by brick, around the fragile piece I had worked so hard to find. But it didn't work, he finally said, his voice completely hollow. I paid them off, every last dime, and she left anyway. She took what was left, and she left last week. The house, it's empty now. It's all just empty. He was crying freely now. The ugly, gasping sobs of a man who has lost everything. The boy in him was crying out for his mother. But the woman holding the phone was no longer just his mother. She was a survivor. I need to see you. Mom, he pleaded. Please. I need to talk to you. I looked around Debbie's warm, sunlit kitchen. I saw the newspaper with its circled apartments. I saw the sturdy, quiet life I was building for myself. I thought of the woman in the parking lot mirror, and I thought of the woman I was now. They were not the same person. I will meet you, I said, and the calmness in my own voice surprised me. It was a voice free of tears, free of anger. It was simply the voice of the truth. But you need to understand. Stephen, I took a slow, steadying breath. You will be meeting a different woman. A different woman. I chose the place. A small, bright coffee shop downtown called The Daily Grind. It was neutral territory. It wasn't my world. And it wasn't his. It was just a place with clean tables and the smell of roasted coffee beans in the air. A public place. I knew, instinctively, that I needed the quiet witness of strangers around us. I arrived 10 minutes early. I bought myself a cup of black coffee and sat at a small table by the window. I didn't fidget. I didn't twist my napkin into knots. I just sat, feeling the warmth of the mug in my hands, and watched the people walk by on the sidewalk. I wore a simple blue dress Debbie had helped me find at the thrift store, and my hair was pinned up neatly. I felt calm. It was a strange, solid feeling, like a stone at the bottom of a quiet river. When Stephen walked in, he looked lost. His eyes scanned the room, and for a moment, they passed right over me. Then he looked again, a flicker of disbelief in his face. It was in that moment I knew I had been right. He truly was meeting a different woman. The woman he had kicked out of his house had been stooped with the weight of her love for him. Her eyes were often clouded with worry for his future. This woman, the one sitting by the window with her coffee, was sitting up straight. Her eyes were clear. They were not angry. They were not sad. They were just still. He walked over to the table, his movements hesitant. He looked older than I remembered, and thinner. There were new lines around his eyes. Mama, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Hello. Stephen, I replied. My own voice was steady. It didn't tremble. It didn't crack. It was just a voice. Sit down. He sat, fumbling with the chair. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at the scarred surface of the table, the same way he used to stare at the fireplace. I'm so sorry, he began, the words rushing out in a torrent of shame. I was a fool. I was weak. I let Amanda. I was in debt. Mama. Bad debt. I don't know what I thought. I just wanted to fix it. I never meant. I held up a hand. A small, simple gesture. But it stopped him cold. I know what you did, Stephen, I said quietly, and I know why you did it. I've had a lot of time to think about it. Too much time. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I let the silence hang in the air between us. I wanted him to feel its weight. I need you to listen to me now, I continued, my voice calm and measured. I'm not here to yell at you. I'm not here to cry. All my tears for this have already been shed. I'm here to tell you what I have learned. He finally looked up at me, his eyes wide and red-rimmed. He looked like a little boy again, lost and scared. But I couldn't be his mother in that way anymore. That part of me had burned away in the cold nights in my car. I forgive you, Stephen, I said. A wave of relief washed over his face. He started to speak, to thank me. But I held up my hand again. No, I said firmly. You need to understand this. This is important. I'm not forgiving you so that you can feel better. I'm not giving you a gift. I'm forgiving you so that I can be free. Hate is too heavy a thing to carry around. It's like carrying a sack of rocks on your back everywhere you go. I've carried enough heavy things in my life. I'm putting this one down. For me, he just stared at me, speechless. You mentioned the house. I went on, that you're selling it? That you want to give me my share? He nodded eagerly. Of course. Mama. It's yours. All of it. If you want. I shook my head slowly. No? No, he asked, his voice cracking with confusion. That money is not mine anymore. And the many on never ponders. Stephen, that house, it was the price of a very hard lesson. For both of us. It was the price of your mistake. And it was the price of my freedom. My freedom from a love that had started to feel more like a cage. I leaned forward just a little, my eyes holding his. You keep that money. You use it to pay for your daughter's future. If Amanda lets you see her, you use it to build a life where you don't have to lie anymore. You use it to learn how to be a responsible man. That is what you will do with that money. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing to say. I had taken away his ability to fix this with money. The one thing he thought could make it right, our relationship. I said, my voice softening just a fraction, will never be what it was. The trust a mother has for her child is a delicate thing. Once it's broken into 1,000 pieces, you can never glue it back together perfectly. There will always be cracks. But, I added, we can maybe build something new, something different, something built on respect, not just obligation, something built on honesty. But it will take time. Stephen, a long time, and it will be up to you to do the building. I stood up. The conversation was over. I had said everything I needed to say. I felt a profound sense of release, as if a chain I hadn't even realized I was wearing had just snapped and fallen away. Mama. Wait. He pleaded, his voice thick with unshed tears. I looked down at my son, the man my boy had become, and for the first time, I saw him clearly, not as my whole world, not as my greatest achievement or my greatest failure. I just saw him as a man, a flawed, broken man who had a long way to go. Take care of yourself. Stephen, I said, and then I turned, and I walked out of the coffee shop, back into the bright afternoon sun, leaving the weight of the past sitting right there at that table. I didn't look back. The house that Judy built. It's been a little over a year since I sat across from my son in that coffee shop. The woman he met that day is the woman I still am. I live in a small, second-floor apartment on the other side of town now. It's not much. Just a living room, a bedroom, and a kitchen barely big enough for one person. But it's mine. The afternoon sun spills in through the large windows, and there's almost always the scent of something baking cinnamon, or yeast, or lemon. It's a quiet place, a peaceful place. I kept my job at the supermarket bakery. Though I only work 2 days a week now, it's enough. It keeps me connected. But my real work, my heart's work, happens on Tuesday afternoons. I teach the beginner's baking class at the community center, the very same one I walked into with trembling hands and a shattered heart. Mrs. Gable retired last spring, and she asked if I would take her place. At first, I said no. I couldn't imagine myself as a teacher. But Debbie, my dear friend Debbie, she just looked at me and said, Judy, who better to teach people how to start over than someone who has? So now, I'm the one handing out aprons and showing women, and sometimes a few brave men, how to measure flour. They come to my class for all sorts of reasons. Some are lonely, some are grieving, some are like I was, standing on the wreckage of a life they no longer recognize, just looking for a safe, warm place to be for a couple of hours. I never ask their stories. I just show them the simple, honest magic of turning flour and sugar into something warm and good. I see the same transformation in them that I felt in myself. The hesitation in their hands slowly gives way to a confident rhythm. The worry in their eyes is replaced by the focus of creation. And when they pull that first fragrant tray from the oven, the smile that blossoms on their faces, well, that's a kind of payment you can't cash at any bank. Stephen and I, we're building something new. It's a slow process. It's not the easy, comfortable relationship we had before, and it never will be. The old foundation was washed away in the storm. This new one is being built carefully, brick by brick, with honesty and clear boundaries. He calls me once a week. Sometimes we talk about the weather. Sometimes he tells me about his new job at a warehouse. He is trying. I can hear it in his voice. He's learning to stand on his own 2 feet, without a mountain of debt or a woman's ultimatum pushing him around. I hope he learns that a parent's love is a gift, not a right. A gift that must be handled with care. Because once it's truly broken, the pieces never fit back together in quite the same way. As for me, I learned a lesson that was just as hard. I learned that a mother's love shouldn't be a blank check. For years, I poured everything I had into that boy, into that house, until my own well ran dry. I thought that was what a good mother did. But you can't pour from an empty cup. You have to keep a little something for yourself, your peace, your security, your own dreams, no matter how small. That isn't selfish, it's survival. Sometimes, when I'm locking up the community center kitchen after class, I think about what it really means to get it all back. This modern world, it can be a cold and noisy place. It tells you that your worth is measured by the size of your house, the balance in your bank account, the things you own. It teaches you to always want more, to reach for the next shiny thing. But I learned a different truth in the geography of that dark parking lot. I learned that true value isn't in the things you can hold. It's in the warmth of a stranger's tea, the quiet dignity of an earned paycheck, and the life-altering power of saying, no more, this far, and no further. And it comes of the word. Getting it all back wasn't about reclaiming a house made of bricks and mortar. It was about building a new one, a stronger one, right here inside myself. A house built with the sturdy foundation of self-respect, with walls of resilience, and with windows that let the sunlight in. This afternoon, there's a new woman in class. She's standing off to the side, her hands clutching her purse, her shoulders hunched as if she's trying to make herself smaller. I've seen that look before. I know that look. I walk over to her, untying my own apron. I gently take the apron from her hands and help her tie it behind her back. She won't meet my eyes. It's okay, I say, my voice soft. I place a reassuring hand on her shoulder, and I feel a slight tremor beneath my touch. We'll start with flour and sugar. Most good things do. She finally looks up at me, and in her uncertain eyes, I see a flicker of something. It's not hope. Not yet. But it's the beginning of hope, and as I smile back at her, a genuine smile born of peace and a freedom I never knew I was missing, I know, deep in my soul, that I am finally, truly home. And that is where Judith Peterson's story comes to a close. A story that began in the cold silence of a car and ended in the warmth of a kitchen filled with hope. What do you think of Judy's final decision to forgive, but not to forget? If you were in her shoes, would you have done anything differently? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I truly do read every single one. Your perspectives give these stories a life beyond the telling. If this story made you feel something, if it made you think, please take a moment to leave a like, share it with someone you believe it might touch, and be sure to subscribe to Deepu Cater Stories so you don't miss the journeys yet to come. I'll meet you in the next story, and who knows, maybe the next one will be about you.